Martin Brunt, Sky News.
Thousands of nurses will strike for the May bank holiday after one of the country's largest unions voted to reject a government pay offer. But the RCN's decision put them at odds with another health union, Unison, whose members accepted the 5% wage increase. And this time round, the industrial action, nurses will provide no cover for emergency care or cancer wards, as our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
All we want to say,
These were historic scenes. Nurses on the picket line for the first time.
I am really pleased to be with you all on this historic day.
And now they will be seen again after the RCN rejected the government's pay offer. Addressing her members, Chief Executive Pat Cullen said she has never been prouder. But Mark, like many of his union colleagues, wants answers.
Pat Cullen and the RCN Council have a lot of hard questions to answer as to why they recommended this deal in the first place when, so many of the membership obviously didn't want it and rejected it.
The offer not only rejected, but more strike dates announced for the end of April, with a ballot on further action to come.
This offer was not enough for our members, and it is now down to the government to listen to the voice of nursing and put a better offer on the table. They need to restore the nurses' pay.
It's a decision that puts the RCN, one of the largest health unions, in conflict with another, Unison. Its members voted in favour.
If we've got a split decision on the Staff Council, then government will have to look at that and make a balanced decision about whether they proceed to implement. But if the majority of health workers are saying they want to accept the offer, then government could be in a tricky position.
The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the Unison result proves the offer is fair and reasonable, calling the RCN's decision hugely disappointing and concerning for patients. We have two of the biggest health unions at odds with each other, with the other health unions still consulting with their members about what to do with the government's pay offer. We're in limbo until the end of the month, when all of the organisations will go back to the government, and hopefully then there will be some sort of resolution. The RCN will ballot its members about strike action for the last 6 months of this year. And that brings about the prospect of nurses and junior doctors standing together on the picket line for the first time.
When do we want it? Now!
Mark is ready to strike again. But despite his union's result, he could yet have a deal he rejected forced on him. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
We'll prove you wrong. That was the defiant message delivered by the Chancellor in Washington today as he met the head of the International Monetary Fund. Jeremy Hunt is predicting that the UK economy will bounce back, but he'll also be hoping that his gamble to resist pay rises for public sector workers will also pay off. Jeremy Hunt has been speaking to our economics and data editor, Ed Conway.
A rare glimpse inside a private meeting in Washington between the UK team and the head of the International Monetary Fund.
We know that you have been very determined.
There is clearly tension here. The IMF thinks Britain will be the weakest economy in the G7 this year. The Chancellor begs to differ.
Well, we're very focused on proving you wrong.
Excellent.
Can you explain, what does that mean? What are we talking about here?
Well, the IMF head said to me that she very much hopes I do prove her wrong. I think the context here, Ed, is that last year we had the fastest growing G7 economy, so we did very well last year. We have so far avoided recession this year, so the economy has shown resilience, but we want to be growing faster.
But do you think that those IMF forecasts are wrong? Is that your hunch?
Well, the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is the government's official forecaster, has much more optimistic forecasts. So if you're asking me which I think is more likely to be the case, I would go with the OBR.
But the latest vote from nurses on further strikes won't help.
What we say is that we will talk about anything except a deal that would mean that inflation is entrenched, and we're having the same discussion this time next year, because that's the root cause of people's anger. It's seeing inflation above 10%, the cost of the weekly shop going up.
Is there a concern here about what this means for the health service itself?
I urge people who are still voting for this pay deal to recognise the fact that union leaders say it's fair and reasonable. Patients want the NHS to be back to normal, and it will be better for staff as well.
Britain's not alone in facing these problems. It's just that it seems that bit worse in the UK right now. On growth, on strikes, on the cost of living. In his effort to prove the fund wrong, the Chancellor may have his work cut out. Ed Conway, Sky News in Washington.
To France now, where after weeks of protests, President Macron's controversial plans to raise the retirement age have been approved by a French court. The bill will be signed into law in the coming days. Sky's Lisa Holland reports now from Paris.
All eyes were on Paris's Constitutional Council, where the decision would be made. For police spotters, the view from the roof, waiting to see how France would react. Yet in the clothes shop next door, we found Alain, who believes these incendiary days could have been avoided.
I can understand people that don't accept it, but maybe it's necessary, but it's the government have to explain why they do it correctly.
France's President Emmanuel Macron had begun the day on a jovial visit to see reconstruction work after the 2019 fire at Notre Dame Cathedral. For him, the day would also end in smiles, with validation of his reforms. He insists France can't afford to keep the pension age at 62 and it must be raised to 64. Across Paris, outside the town hall, workers from the left-wing CGT union gathered, bitterly disappointed but vowing to fight on.
President Macron's legal crisis may have ended, but his political crisis has not. There are still a lot of angry people in France who refuse to accept his pension reforms.
Demonstrators have taken to the streets every week since mid-January. Strikes have hit France hard. Stéphane Vardon works on the railways as a ticket inspector. Taking industrial action means he hasn't been paid.
I'm very disappointed, I'm very angry, because we're on strike for 4 weeks. It's very difficult for us.
There's a sense from some they may need new tactics.
I don't know how long someone can just talk and walk and strike, and with no reaction.
But the old tactics of a hardcore prepared to take on the riot police saw skirmishes in side streets in Paris. France comes out of the pension ruling fragmented over the question of how long people should have to work. Lisa Holland, Sky News, Paris.
2 serving Metropolitan Police officers have been dismissed over discriminatory messages they sent to colleagues in a WhatsApp group. The 2 former police officers were found guilty of gross misconduct over racist, homophobic and sexist messages they shared between May 2016 and June 2018. The US High Court has temporarily blocked restrictions to access on the abortion pill mifepristone. The Supreme Court today decided to temporarily keep in place rules for use of an abortion drug while it takes time to consider the issues raised in a court challenge. There were smiles of relief as the exchange of more than 800 prisoners linked to the long-running war in Yemen began today. The United Nations brokered deal has been in the works for months. The 3-day exchange will see prisoners transported between Saudi Arabia and Yemen's capital, Sana'a.
Thank you, Sally. You join us again in Ballina, where in the past 10 minutes, Joe Biden has finished his address to the tens of thousands of people gathered at St. Murdoch's Cathedral, the culmination of President Biden's 4-day visit. Now, earlier today, he was seen wiping away tears after meeting the priest who performed the last rites for his son, Beau Biden, before he died in 2015. Here's our island correspondent, Stephen Murphy.
This was always going to be an emotional journey, but even the most powerful man in the world didn't see this coming. On his visit to County Mayo's Knock Shrine, Joe Biden was asked if he'd like to meet the Irish chaplain who, while attached to the US military,
gave his son Beau Biden the last rites as he died from brain cancer in 2015. It was a chance meeting away from the cameras that left the US president in tears.
Father Gibbons, the priest, said, well, the priest that kind of supported your son works here at Knock. And he didn't know I worked there. So then he sent over for me to go and see him. And when I see him, he was a little bit a bit emotional. You know, the last time we met was when his son was very ill, 8 years ago.
After prayer and reflection, President Biden visited a hospice with another connection to his son, a plaque at its entrance dedicated to Beau Biden's memory. Joe Biden had turned the sod on the centre on a private visit in 2017. It was an emotional start to the day, but it ended in a party. This is the ancestral Biden home of Ballina, and they'd been waiting for this since their favourite son was elected president.
It's good to be here and to show people that I have met him, because a lot of people might think, what are you going down for again? But I want to meet him even a third time, and the picture I will always treasure.
It's strange that he's so close to our home, you know, when we're used to seeing him on television. But
yeah, it is a bit surreal that we'll be kind of this close to him, because we kind of just see him on the news.
President Biden spoke in front of a cathedral built with 27,000 bricks supplied by his ancestor Edward Blewett in 1828.
As he labored, I'm sure Edward imagined that one day his family would worship here, that his children would be baptized here like his son Patrick was, and that future generations of his family would mark the milestones of their lives here in these sturdy walls. But I doubt he ever imagined his great-great-great-grandson would return 200 years later as President of the United States of America.
This was a rousing end to a grand tour of Ireland that mixed the deeply personal with the political. Joe Biden leaves this island a US president more connected than ever with the land of his forefathers. Stephen Murphy, Sky News, Ballina, County Mayo.
Well, our International Affairs Editor Dominic Waghorn is still here with me. Dominic, so that's it. President Biden is going to be soon wheels up back to the US to deal with that leak of Pentagon documents. How do you think he will assess his time here in Ireland?
I think that speech wasn't his best. I think it was a kind of rather a jumbled collection of all his greatest hits, but in no particular order. And we heard about his belief in hope, liberty, greater dignity, possibility, humanity and courage. These are the themes of his visit, but the themes of his political career. And then we had a very long kind of story of his life, of the Blewetts, of the Finnegans, going back to the 1840s in greater detail than we've had all the way through this trip. So it was a story, it was a speech for consumption here, but also for consumption back home, because that story of immigrants, of people escaping economic hardship in the old world and going to the new world and building a new life for themselves is something that millions of Americans appeal to and it resonates with, whether they're Irish or not. So it's a speech, I think, of a politician who is certainly thinking about preparing for announcing to run again for re-election, something he's hinted at. I think, though, looking at him tonight, you know, he looks tired, and to be honest, he looks old, and you have to really wonder whether he's got what it takes, the energy and the vigour, a need to campaign to be president again in his 80s at this time of his life.
We're expecting to hear an announcement from him at some point very soon. Dominic, for now, thank you so much. Well, that is all from us here in Ballina as President Joe Biden makes his way back to the United States. He's got plenty to deal with once he gets back stateside, not least that Pentagon leaks. But after a 4-day here in Ireland, arriving for the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement and some serious speeches, and tonight a personal speech given to the thousands here in Ballina. President Biden is on his way back to the United States. For the entire team here in County Mayo, it's back to Sally now in London.
Kamali, thanks very much. Some space news now. It may be a day late, but a European spacecraft is tonight on its way to Jupiter on a mission to explore whether there is any life on the planet's ocean-bearing moons. The voyage will last 8 years and cost £14 billion, as our science and technology editor Tom Clark reports.
Allumage EAP, décollage.
Could life lurk in hidden oceans on Jupiter's moons? The JUICE mission is finally on its way to find out. Launch was an anxious moment at Imperial College in London. Scientists here built and will operate one of the mission's key instruments.
To wait so long for this to happen, we had to wait another day. It's finally gone, and we're so happy to see it on its way. It's a beautiful launch.
This is a real moment of excitement and relief for the scientists involved because the mission's finally on its way, and for the European Space Agency that's never sent a dedicated mission to Jupiter 4 before, and certainly not one with as many scientific instruments on it as this. It's very much just the first step on a very long and perilous journey all the way to the Jupiter system. The Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer is embarking on an 8-year-long, 4 billion mile slow waltz through the solar system. Several orbits of the Sun, a slingshot around the Moon and Earth, another round Venus, are needed to get it to Jupiter in 2031. Once it arrives, it will perform flybys of Jupiter and 3 of its moons, Europa, Callisto and Ganymede, some as close as 25 kilometres to the surface. What it sees will be thanks to engineers here at Teledyne in Essex. They made the imaging sensor in JUICE's camera. No easy task, as radiation around Jupiter would destroy conventional electronics.
The environment it sees at Jupiter is nasty, especially really, really high radiation, so there's a high probability of anything ordinary will fail, and the launch environment is quite nasty as well, so you've got to make sure it survives launch, survives the journey there, and it continues to work well in the horrible environment that's around Jupiter. It is very exciting, and especially when it's the first image of something that's never been imaged before.
Other tools, radars and magnetometers will peer into the ice covering Jupiter's moons, study their atmospheres and measure tidal forces believed to keep saltwater oceans beneath, warm and liquid. Could life like that found around deep-sea vents on Earth exist on the moons orbiting our giant distant neighbour? Or are we all alone? Well, watch this space. Tom Clark, Sky News.
Now, you can take your hands off the wheel and your feet off the pedals, but you'll have to watch the road. That's because Britain has become the first country in Europe to approve hands-free driving technology. The car in question is the Ford Mustang Mach-E, already being used by motorists in the US. Lisa Dowd has been trying it out.
This car is a first for British and European motorways. Press the Blue Cruise on, set the speed and take the hands off. There's a real feeling of sickness in your stomach, and you feel like you might go to either side of the road, but you don't. It's legal to let go, but you can't look away. This itself feels really odd, because I'm just not looking at the road. And the alarm sounds, it wants me to watch the road ahead. It's almost driverless driving, isn't it? But not quite.
It's almost, yeah. So we are taking care of the acceleration, braking, steering. We figure out where the lane markers are. We react to it. And you don't need to keep your hands in the near region of the steering wheel.
The tech is on board the newest electric Ford Mustang Mach-E. Nearly 200,000 drivers in the US and Canada have used it without incident, but some have concerns.
The key thing for us is ensuring that the drivers themselves who buy these cars know exactly what the car can and cannot do. And at the moment, that's all down to Ford, and there's no government intervention and no government training.
The government says it shows the UK is at the forefront of innovation, and Ford plans to roll out Blue Cruise to more of its vehicles.
I think it's all about just making the whole driving experience better and easier for our customers.
Hands-free is free at first. Then you'll have to like it enough to pay £17.99 a month for it. Lisa Dowd, Sky News, Warwickshire.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll be taking a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview, including this story on the front of the Times, their headline. Nurses set for more strikes as junior doctors push for joint walkouts. And tonight we're joined by Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. There they are, standing by for us. Join us after this short break.